Welcome into another edition of Esports Weekly, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm Ryan Bailey. I'll be your host as per usual. And we're coming out of the bye week for the SPL. So this show is going to be all about setting the stage for the second half of Phase 2. We've also got a lot of movement in the Smite Minor League, a new king on top of North America in particular. And we'll be going over that in just a little bit, as well as a preview of the new episode of Roll Q sat down with some junglers, and you're going to want to hear what they had to say about the state of their role. It's been quite a discussion as of late, even if I might not agree with it. You get a chance to hear from some of the best to ever do it in the jungle role coming up later on towards the show. But I want to start with what we're going to see next week, and that is a big week for Team Dignitas. If you think back to Phase 1, a couple episodes of Esports Weekly ago, maybe more than a couple, we were talking about kind of test week for E-United. How good was E-United? Was E-United the real deal? They didn't do so well that week, though they've done better since then, I have to admit. This, for me, is test week for Team Dignitas. They've got a tough one ahead of them. They've got Pittsburgh Knights and they've got Splice, two teams that really do have a claim to that number 2 spot right now in the SPL. I think that right now we went over our power rankings last week. It was Renegades on top for just about everybody, and that's to be expected. They won MSI. They've looked hot since Phase 2 started. But Rival has been kind of the de facto number 2 up until recently, where Splice takes them down, and now I feel like that spot's up for grabs. We've talked a lot about whether or not it's Rival or Splice in that second spot. Where's Dignitas been in this discussion? In the actual standings, they are number 2, and they spent the majority of Phase 1 undefeated. So why aren't they in the discussion for top 2? I don't know. I think it's a perception thing for Team Dignitas. I think that after another LAN where they didn't win, and I don't even want to say they disappointed, because I don't think that's a fair assessment of what happened to them in the midseason invitational, but after another LAN where they did not win, it just feels like they've fallen by the wayside. They also haven't looked particularly inspiring to start Phase 2, and so I think that's really brought them down in a lot of people's power rankings, myself included. So this is the week for them to really make a difference and show exactly where they are in the overall standings. If Dignitas comes out of this week 2-0 in their 2 sets, beating Pittsburgh Knights on Thursday, and then they beat Splice on Friday, I think they are the second best team in the SPL. I mean, yes, sure, Rival's still going to be up there. Rival's going to be up there basically no matter what. Splice going to be up there no matter what. But especially the set against PK really does set the table for who's 3-4 area, who's 4-5 area. That's critical coming into the back end of Phase 2. You want to get to that top 3 for sure. Those are going to be your best seeding opportunities for Worlds, no doubt about that. And really, nowhere you get as far as a seed is going to be a great draw for you, I don't think. I think SPL teams are that good right now. But this is going to show us where Dignitas really sits in the grand scheme of the SPL. And on the other side, the flip side of the coin, how good is Pittsburgh Knights? We see them dominate all the bottom end teams, and then they can't quite get there when it comes to the top end. Is this going to be the week where they can finally beat a top end team for the first time in what feels like a while? How about Splice? Was their win over Rival a fluke? I don't think so, and they get to prove it this week up against Dignitas on Friday. Of course, those aren't our only SPL games. We've got Obey Alliance with their doubleheader coming up in not too long as well on Thursday and Friday. It's going to be a good one, so make sure you tune in. Test week for Obey a little bit as well, though we're expecting a little bit less from them, I'd say. I mean, it's not a knock on Obey Alliance. It's just one of them's Team Dignitas. You know what I mean? They've got a pedigree for sure with that level of success. And speaking of success, we've got 5 successful plays for you from week number 4. Now, we went over the top ones from Phase 1, over the first half of Phase 2, I should say, in last week's episodes of the top 5 plays, but we kind of skipped over week 4, so we figured why not go back and do it right now. It's time for our top plays presented by Respawn. Number 5, we're going to kick it off with Panda Cat. He was a big part of last week's as well on this on her, but this turnaround play, he hears the blink coming from Scream, is able to hit the hot 180 and end up impaling him away and stop himself from getting Frostiac comboed from Scream, who was trying to do it to him. Scream did ultimately do it to him. That set, by the way. Susano pretty good, it turns out. Number 4, Ducky with a great play. It's not the only time you're going to see him here on the top 5 plays, but he's going to clock in at number 4. I've said it once, I've said it 1,000 times. Set getting multiple skewers to all hit the same person might be the coolest thing in the game right now, and that is exactly what I'm talking about. How cool is that, man? Takes down Aqua with his flock because he's a duck. And we looked it up, and that was the only one that I wanted to say. I don't know. The other names for groups of ducks, very odd, and I wasn't going to do a different sort of learn something on top 5 plays, but here you go. You can learn something. A paddle is something that you can call a group of ducks, apparently. All right, number 3. Paul on Uller, usually pretty good. This, a little bit better than good. Pauler is what we like to call this one, because he was doing it. Neil Ma with a beautiful body block on that Dharmic Pillar, by the way. So Paul gets this kill on Lasbra, yeah. And then he goes, more food on the other side of the map. Let me just walk over to duo lane real quick and clean up these last 3 kills and grab myself a triple. If you want to count the one on Lasbra in mid, I do. It's basically a quadra. You can't stop me from counting it, and you won't. Number 2 is Ducky yet again. It wouldn't be a week of the SPL if we didn't have some Fire Giant steals. That's kind of the way it's gone so far this year. Objective Secure has been tough. This one for Space Station Gaming. Space Station's in the lead in this game. They're doing great. And then Ducky, I don't even know if it's skewer, if it's a hit from his sand clone. It's impossible to see. It's the slightest tiny bit of damage. Space Station end up losing the objective. That one hurt. It really did. I felt bad for him on that one. I still don't know what stole it, to be honest with you. Number 1, though, you don't have to feel bad for Space Station much longer because Jeff Hinla is going to clock in for your number 1 play from Week 4, courtesy of Respawn. This pull to save Andenster off of Weekend's dunk mid-Rat 2 is absurd. Now, feels bad that Andy then teleported into Moswell's damage, but no harm, no foul. Well, there was harm, and I guess that means there was a foul. But not for Jeff Hinla, because he played that absolutely perfectly. Impressive stuff from him. Not so much the entirety of Space Station Gaming as they lost on Week 4. Remember, going in to Week 4, we were saying this is the battle to determine who's the number 10 seed right now in everyone's power ranking. Is it Obey or is it Space Station? Luminosity had really leapfrogged a lot of these people's sort of power rankings. All of us here at Skillshot, I think, were in that same boat. And ultimately, for Jeff and Bear and the boys, they are now your de facto 10th seed in the SPL, even if the standings don't reflect it. That's how we feel as far as the power rankings go. But you don't have to wait around any longer for the rest of our information coming here on Esports Weekly. As I mentioned, preview of Roll Q coming up very, very shortly. A breakdown of the new power rankings of the minor league in North America in particular. But first, we've got to go through each and every SPL game and give you a quick preview on that. So stay tuned here on Esports Weekly. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. Man, production cannot mess with you like that. That is absolutely cruel. That is messed up, man. All right, welcome back. We're back and in the saddle here. As I open the show, Dignitas has a tough week ahead of them, and to talk about it, we've got their correspondent, Graham Hadfield, joining us. Graham, welcome in. You messed me up there as well. You laughed and what?
I was off camera, so I wasn't allowed to.
No, you're not allowed to laugh. That's all. You're not allowed to laugh in that instance.
Of course I am.
No, it's not. It's mean to me, and that's what's most important. to me. What's most important to Dignitas is that they pass these 2 tests. We'll start, just what they've had so far this year. How are they feeling going into this week?
Well, let's look back at what they've done so far in the phase, right? Because obviously we saw what happened at MSI, we saw what happened in phase 1, but this year so far, SSG, they beat them 3-0, lost to Rival, win against LG. Now on paper, when you look at that, SSG and LG, we've spoken a little bit about LG are on the rise, SSG definitely on the decline. The Rival loss, though, is a big change up there, especially with how the performance went from the start of the year when they played against Rival in that close 5-game series. Obviously, they're all still 5-game series, but it didn't go 5 games this time around.
No. Rival was able to clearly make some adjustments, and Dignitas was unable to really adjust back, I would say, to what Rival was doing. Do you agree with what I was saying at the top of the show? Where
I'm actually angry with you, to be honest.
Why is that?
Because you stole everything I was about to say, which is exactly the same thing, to be honest, of this is a really big week for Dignitas. It's 2 big tests for them, Knights and Splice. 2 of the teams that they're going to be vying for the top 3 spots for, maybe, top 4, 5. That's how difficult the league is at the top in my eyes. You really can't call it at the moment of who's the top dog. But Dig has to do well against Knights and Splice.
Why do you think Dignitas doesn't get enough credit as a potential number 2 or number 3 team in the league right now?
I don't know. I actually don't know. I think a lot of people is because this team is through the base, the quality of this team that they have. I think the main thing is the core of this team is stuck together for so long. Everyone knows Trix, Cuvo, and Variety will perform very, very well on the day-to-day of the SPL. They've had Ataraxia and Horwin come in, but both those players, to be fair, don't get the same level as a lot of the other people in their position in terms of, well, expectation from them or reliability, or you don't sit there and go, Ataraxia's going to get a pentakill this game. Although people should. These guys have the talent. They've got the potential, and they showed us in phase 1 they've got that. The difference is, however, is that there's other names in those pools that definitely get looked to first of all, and I think that's been the biggest issue for them, is that people still underestimate them, but I don't think that's a bad thing for Dignitas. I would have preferred them to be at this point now without having the trajectory they got in the first phase, because I think a lot of that kind of played with them a little bit weird actually in the first phase because they did so well.
Sure.
Speaking to them more last year, they were saying, the first phase was good, but they saw things that they went to improve on. They were struggling to find improvements. I kept reiterating this because it's a very good point. They were good at the start, but they did have issues, and they were trying to correct them, but they weren't finding the speed at the same rate as everybody else. And now you come into phase 2 with the same sort of questions being asked, whereas other teams have really started to catapult themselves up, and I feel Dignitas have stayed that constant more than anything else.
Where do you feel like they need that area of improvement most, that they're still lacking, that other teams may have improved upon?
Honestly, I think it might be just a team chemistry as a whole. I think that's a very weird thing to say because the chemistry looks a little bit better. They've played a lot in the second phase, if you notice, though. We're switching around Ataraxia and Horrorwind in different positions.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of movement in terms of mages going to the dual lane and a lot more hunters towards the mid. Dignitas are one of the only teams, alongside PK to be fair, that switch the roles of their players in terms of their position, rather than just giving them different gods to play. Now there's definitely a conversation to be had there of which way is going to be the best way, in terms of do you keep the mage player on mages, do you keep the hunter on hunters, or do you keep the role specific? Because there's a big difference between playing the dual lane as a person who plays mid lane all the time as a mage, right?
Sure.
Because even if you change a god in that lane, you change gods all the time in the role when you play, You're used to that. But changing the position of a player makes a big knock-on effect where you're not so used to when the wave gets there in the mid lane, for example. If you're Ataraxia in mid, when's the wave going to be there? What's my time is going to be for my red and my blue? My red and getting to the mid harpies and things like that. There's more to think about in a different direction. Then the same for Horrorwind too. His positioning in lane has definitely been awkward in that dual lane a little bit.
Yeah.
No discredit to him for it. It's just been a little bit awkward because he's not sure where his position should be in these matchups, knowing that one side he can't get ganked from.
Right. This is a totally different sort of setup. And as you mentioned, PK is another team that has been doing this. How do you think that matchup kind of happens? You've got Herwin versus Zeros in the long lane now.
I'm interested by that to see if both players do that, and if both teams still go with the strategy we've seen a little bit more of Zeros back to the dual lane alongside Herwin, and those two get to battle it out there. In the battle of the Toffs is what I'm probably going to expect, to be honest, with how Toffs been going as well lately, and how they both do enjoy it and have performed well just lately on it. Or will they both go default because they both know that both teams want to do it this way, right?
Sure.
Maybe they look for a bit more of a default option. I think it's really come down to the game day of where they just position on the map more than anything else, and we may see a bit of fluctuation in this match to do with those two.
How about against Splice? Because they've got that matchup on Friday then.
Well, here's the thing, with having a doubleheader in a week, and we've got quite a few doubleheaders. I think 3 teams have doubleheaders this week. With them having a doubleheader as well, I think the biggest problem from their point of view is what can they keep reserved away from Splice that they can still have something to throw at Splice? Because having a game in 1 week is easy, all said and good. But the problem is that then you go into the next day with the same sort of things you've been planning all week, and you may have had to show a little bit more in the set than you wanted to in terms of preparations.
Sure.
That could cause a lot of problems for them. So hopefully they've got something in the tank for Splice that's going to be a bit more of a surprise, or maybe they just come out and stomp PK and then Splice are the ones worrying.
That could be the case. Graham, thank you very much for joining us and talking about Team Dignitas. As you mentioned, it isn't just Dignitas that has a doubleheader. PK as well has to deal with both Dignitas and Obey Alliance. We'll be right back to talk about the Knights' chances this week. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. The Pittsburgh Knights aren't the only team, or excuse me, Dignitas isn't the only team with a doubleheader, because the Pittsburgh Knights also will be facing off against 2 opponents this week. We've got John Finch, their correspondent, joining us here in studio to go over it. And Finch, PK, I don't know if you heard my spiel at the top of the show, but I think that PK is one of those teams that probably doesn't get enough credit for how good they are, how close they are to the top end. But I think a lot of it comes from the fact that they haven't consistently beaten these top 3 teams or so. Do you think that a win against Dignitas this week would change that?
I think it would help them, but I don't know if it would change that entirely. Remember, they came in with a super team aura, right, into the start of this year. I mean, they're Adaptings on this team, Deathwalker, Zeros, Emilzy, and Vote. And because of that, I think that they have really, really high expectations. But, I mean, I was talking to Ro about it a little while ago. I mean, when we were, I think he was there with us at Dragon Con. He was able to come down. And he was saying how he thought the expectations were maybe a little bit too high for a group of players with this much experience, and they all have their own mindsets about the game and how they can go, that maybe people should temper those just a little bit.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. A lot of people think that you've got all this experience, you put it all together, and it's additive. But sometimes that ends up working against you. It's kind of nice to have 2, maybe 3 veterans, and then 2 players who are a little bit newer to the SPL but talented, because then you can just teach them the way you want them to play.
But I do think it also gears this team up to be in a perfect spot towards making a run at Worlds, right? They would have, at that point, an entire year's worth of experience working together to make them a really sneaky, scary team. But also, I think this team should be getting a ton of credit. They're like 3rd place right now in the standings, aren't they? I mean, I feel as though you're right. The Knights maybe aren't getting as much credit as perhaps that they deserve. And that's why I think this big week coming up for them is actually going to be pretty important. It's not just they're playing up against Dignitas, but they're playing against Obey. They have what I think is critical for determining a team's worth. How you play up against a team that's equal to you, if not even slightly better, and then how you play in a match where you're supposed to win.
Sure.
And we'll get to see both those on display here this week.
For me, I'm immediately looking at Deathwalker, because when you look at what Dignitas does, so much of it goes through variety, and then you look at Obey's recent successes, a lot of that has been through Ducky. So I think Deathwalker's got to have a big week.
Yes, I think he's got 2 very, very difficult matchups coming up this week. Obviously, the matchup, as you mentioned, with Variety up against Dignitas, but I think the matchup up against Ducky is also pretty sneaky important. Like you said, he's become a bit of a catalyst for this team. I think with some of the changes that they've had, he's been a little bit more free to be the kind of monster that we hear everyone say that he is, but we don't always get to see put on display. Season 5 comes to mind a little bit, and then even some of Phase 1. But clearly, both of these players are now, I think, capable at this point. And one other thing, and I don't want this to be taken the wrong way, but I don't think Deathwalker has looked like Deathwalker this year. Coming into Season 6, he and Benji, for me, were the 2 at the top of the list for solo laners for my money. And it hasn't looked like that for him. I think Benji's lived up to that billing, but Deathwalker has regressed a little bit. I want to see some more of that guy that was taking over games for Rival here on this Knights team.
Yeah, it is going to be a key for this team if they want to make one of those Worlds runs, is Deathwalker stepping up and being the guy, I think, for this squad. and he's got to do it against Dignitas in particular. How do you think not only this lane goes, but this whole match goes for PK?
This is really tough. I do think that there might be a slight edge for Variety when it comes to the team fighting portion of the game. I think Variety does such a good job at picking his spots, and Dignitas is one of the teams that play the best as a unit. I think of them and Rival in that regard, the way they're able to play as all 5 members. That means Deathwalker, I think, has got to get some of this work done in the laning phase. Maybe get a little bit of help, some rotations coming over to try and get him ahead or something like that, because it is very difficult to match Variety in terms of his placement in team fights and picking his moments. He's very good at that.
Yes, that is certainly a spot where he excels. And Pittsburgh Knights, I mean, we talked about Deathwalker adapting, I think, is looking more and more like himself.
Yeah.
But this meta, I don't know how much it favors PK. I mean, they're doing this role swap thing with Vote and with Zeros. Do you feel like that's the best way that their 3v3 is going to be strong, is with Vote in the mid lane?
I think so, because Zeros is the kind of person that likes to do his own thing, right? I mean, that's just straight up the way that the guy is. If he thinks something's the best, he's going to demand that it gets picked for him early on. If he thinks it's something strong, he's going to make sure that he's playing in. And I think that giving him that long lane farm kind of gives him free reign for that to work well. It just means that Vote's got to pick up a little bit in that mid role. It is difficult to play.
Yeah.
You're splitting a lot of your farm. It's not easy. I don't know how familiar he is with it. That's something that he's got to make sure that he's improving on too, so that can work and get the most out of Zeros.
Let's see what the rest of the casters think is going to happen in this match. And it's split down the middle. Had Graham and Melissa both feeling like PK going to take this one, but Tully and Tom leading Team Dignitas. Finch, where are you going on this?
It is so tough. Most of the times I come onto this one and I'm pretty easily able to give my prediction about how I think the set's going to go.
Yeah, your teams are PK and Rival. You've got a tough job.
Usually it's pretty easy for me, but I do think this time I will take the Knights, though it'll be close. I'd be surprised if it's less than 5 games.
Yeah, I think we're in for a long one on Thursday, that's for sure. Now on Friday, Pittsburgh Knights have to go up against Obey, and you mentioned this, Finch. Having a doubleheader sometimes can be a disadvantage.
It can be brutal. There's a lot that you have to prepare for, especially against a team like Obey that are difficult to prepare for already, just in general, because that team likes to play a lot of different stuff. I do think this is another one where the Knights are favored, but maybe not quite as much as you might think. The gap is constantly shrinking between all 10 teams, I think, at this point. You heard me hesitate there because Space Station's been struggling. But everyone else, I think the gap has always been shrinking, so I think you can't afford to take anyone for granted.
This is a must-win, I think, of your Pittsburgh Knights. You cannot afford to lose games like Obey Alliance, so you got to win on Friday, especially if you're not winning on Thursday. Finch, thank you very much for joining us. And as Finch mentioned, Obey Alliance, new look, looking a lot better. We'll talk to their correspondent on the other side about how these new changes have affected the team going forward. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. Obey Alliance is new and improved. They're definitely playing a lot better than they were in Phase 1 under that trifecta banner, but is it good enough to win either end of their doubleheader? We've got their correspondent, Graham Hadfield, standing by to go over it. Welcome back, first of all, Hitting Man. This one might have a bit of a different tone than the Dignitas segment, I think. I mean, Obey has looked a lot better.
They do. I've got to say, I really do like this squad, and I think this is going to be a squad that this year may not be their year overall, but I think this is a really good year for them to grow as a team to show their actual potential. I think on paper, the squad is slowly getting better. If you take into account this team went through a big iteration change at the end of Phase 1 into MSI, with the likes of Moswell joining this team, now Minro joining this team too. But the other remnants of this team with Weekend here, Wowie, and of course Ducky, who had such a great performance last week in the SPL, last time we broadcast rather, not last week, because we had a bye week. The main thing with Ducky there is he started to step up a little bit more too now, and actually gets to see a little bit more recognition for why he's in the league in the first place. Team as a whole though, I mean, they beat SSG, who hasn't, and then lost 3-0 to SK. And I think that's the more telling one of they're struggling against teams like SK. Now they're running into E United, which I would say is about the same level as SK right now.
Sure.
Definitely a hit or miss situation. And then got PK the day after. Yeah,
it's tough for Obey. There's no doubt about that. But, I mean, E United, on the other hand, just lost to Luminosity, who's still below Obey in the standings. I don't know if
Yes.
that's really the case, but I mean, you've got an opportunity against E United in particular.
They do, and that's their first game as well. And I think that's a really good test for them this week. Their first day taking on United, first of all, and trying to get something in the bag for this. Obviously, Ducky with a great performance last week against the boys at Space Station will give him huge boons, with the fact that he's going to be going into this matchup against Benji in the solo lane. Ducky's got a big time ahead of him to an extent in this match, and I think the set pick could be something that could surprise them again, potentially. But United's playstyle is definitely a little bit different than some of the other teams in the league too. So it's definitely going to have to be a focus towards prepping specifically for Reunited rather than the whole league as a whole with this first matchup. And then hope you've got something in the bank for PK later on.
Yeah, that's going to be the real test, is how well you can bounce back after that first set, regardless of the outcome. I mean, should we get excited about Obey Alliance? As you mentioned, they beat Space Station, but is that an achievement to hang your hat on these days?
Well, I mean, a lot of people always look at me and, there's been a lot of talk of me making the script, which I do. But at the same time, with the script, I mean, you've got to look at the trajectory of a team as time goes on more than anything else. I'm going to look at Obey.
Character development.
Exactly. I can see character development with this team, and they are, in my eyes, potentially a dark horse to make a run towards Worlds at the tail end. It's a possibility. It's a tricky one, but there's a chance there. And I think that's the one that people may be like, wait, where's this team come from? The same way Splice came last year out of nowhere with their performances. Obey have a little bit of that in the tank. I don't think much of it, however, though. But they're a good game. They're a much better team, I feel like, this time round than they did start the year with.
Yeah, that is true. You could certainly see that happening for this squad if things go their way. Got to try and go their way up against the United, though. I think a big thing is how well can Mineral match up against Kalas? A lot of teams have really tried to focus out Kalas' God pool so far this year. It's been successful for some of them. Is Mineral up to that task?
I think Mineral overall is going to have a big task because he's just joined the league. He's never really been pro before. He's only had a couple of games under his belt at the moment. Sure, he's got synergy with Worry and the likes. I actually think, honestly, there's more pressure on Worry this game because he's going to try and keep Emilito in check.
Sure.
And I don't know how Worry's going to play this one out. I think Worry might need to match aggression with aggression a little bit more. I know Worry's quite happy to be like, okay, you're under pressure, that's fine. I'll sit back and farm, wait for my opportunity. I think if he does that against Emilito, he may get abused a little bit more. At least he won't. Maybe his team will with the rotations. But Wowie has picked up his rotations in terms of getting around the map a lot quicker towards the middle area because he's from Fireworks.
Yeah, that is true. He played the Morrigan in their set against Space Station, I believe it was, and really made it work on that Ratatoskr transformation quite a bit. Saw a bit of highlights on that earlier. I mean, this one is going to be difficult, but then against the Knights, I think it really ratchets up a notch in that difficulty.
It's weird as well because, like, even if they do well against United, I'm still going to be looking at the Dig versus PK set in the same day that this set happens and go, okay, how did PK do here? Did they get defeated badly by Dignitas? Does that mean we're going to get angry adapting the day after?
Oh, no.
Or is it going to be they wipe the floor with Dignitas and then walk in the next day and maybe underestimate Obey? That is a possibility.
Okay.
Not a huge one because I do think PK are definitely in that zone right now. I think they just hit their zone towards the end of Phase 1.
Yeah.
And I think in Phase 2 is really where the money is made, at least in their eyes, and that's what they care about, is the World Championship.
Yeah, I agree with you. I do think that this PK team has improved a lot, and Obey Alliance might have their work cut out for them. In fact, I imagine a lot of the predictions for this game are going to lean the same way towards the Pittsburgh Knights, and indeed, all four other casters feeling like PK going to take it.
Yeah, same. I mean, I've got to be realistic about this. I think Knights are looking really good right now. Taking into account some of the level of the talent on that team as well, they're definitely focused more towards Worlds than anything else.
Sure.
And we saw that out of some of these players before in the start of previous seasons where the spring and summer might not have been the greatest, but when it came time to fall, when it came time to get to Worlds and try and win, they were all on their A game.
I mean, Weekend is one of the premier LAN players in Smite history, right? He's just had a lot of LANs under his belt, so you know that he's going to be ready for that sort of style and could potentially make some noise. So
Definitely.
We'll see if that ends up being enough for Obey Alliance. Graham, thank you very much for joining us and talking about Obey. We've got E United coming up on the other side. Anatoli's going to come in and talk to us about their mentality after a tough loss to Luminosity. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. E United was riding pretty high after MSI. They were still in a good spot in the standings, and then they went up against 10th seed Luminosity and took the L. Tough loss for them to go over it, and they're set this week. We've got their correspondent, Anatoly, joining us here in studio. Totally, just based off body language and what we saw after that loss, it did not seem to me like E United was particularly happy.
Definitely not happy. I mean, it is LG, a team that was struggling in phase number 1, but honestly, it's a team that improved, I think, since phase number 1. E United got caught slipping, I think, but this is still a very strong team that I think can easily go the distance, and all they have to do is qualify to the top 6. Having a record of 6-3 in the first phase, still very early in phase 2 as they're 1-1, they're still in the race for top 6.
I completely agree with you that it could just be a fluke, but do you think that's what it is? Do you think it was just a one-time thing?
I definitely think that it is a one-time thing. I think they do need some outside coaching perspective. There is no official coach listed for E United, so looking at their picks and bans draft, I think they're relying too heavily on prioritizing Emilito's pick. Out of the 29 games since Emilito stepped up for E United, 25 of his picks has been before the secondary ban phase, right? So they're really leaning on that long lane, and sometimes the matchup's not always in his favor either.
Sure, so a lot of Jingwei just off the top of my head that we're seeing for him. Maybe you give him something a little bit more aggressive in that lane. Is that where you'd want to go and try and push him against Wowie this match?
I mean, not necessarily lean on the long lane in terms of giving him an aggressive guard, but maybe have Eyesight's baby rotate over to give Emilito some assistance.
Yeah, certainly is an option. Got to make something happen. Did seem to like this Ola run quite a bit in their set up against Luminosity, so that could be another guy that they start to prioritize. You heard we did an interview with Yannick that aired last Esports Weekly. He said that a big thing that they tried to focus on in their setup against E United was Kalas's God Pool and try and ban him out. Do you think that's an area that Obey might try and exploit as well?
It's possible after hearing what Yannick was saying. I think also, just like Emilito, Kalas leans a little bit more on just a couple of picks. Fafnir comes to mind a lot. Ares from time to time. Sometimes Eyesight's baby will play it, but I think that that's where United needs to improve upon, is their prioritization of not just the long lane, but also the support role.
Yes, that's one thing that I don't know that enough teams really get credit for, is their ability to be flexible in the drafts. United might be struggling with that a little bit. And where else is that team kind of putting their focus in the picks and bans? You said it's a lot in that long lane. Does that mean they're leaving Benji in bad matchups a lot of the time?
Not necessarily leaving him in bad matchups, because Benji can turn a bad matchup into a good matchup. I'm looking at his enemy days of Season 2 when he takes the Guan Yu and he beats Hades players, right?
Right.
In matchups that he shouldn't ever normally win. And yes, he does get his pick off in the secondary, after the secondary ban phase, which is fine as a solo laner. You want the counter matchup anyway, and he's been able to do good things with it. And I think in this matchup, up against Obey, where he will be up against Ducky, another player that either likes to play aggressive or kind of likes to receive that aggression, should spark fireworks.
It should be a lot of fun for that matchup, I think. Ducky's been playing a lot better. Benji's been playing like a premier solo laner basically all year long. And Big Man Tings has been a big talking point for this United roster. He started off really hot. Has he cooled off in your mind?
I don't know, because I'm still seeing a lot of different things from him. In the 9 games thus far that United's played in Phase 2, Big Man has played 7 different gods. I want to see him a little bit more consistency in that mid position, and I think the games that United did lose was because of the pressure being dealt onto Big Man. It wasn't just necessarily focusing out Kalas's picks. It was putting pressure on the thaw from Big Man Tings in that game number 2 that kind of disrupted United's momentum after winning game 1.
Yeah, I agree. I do think that just off the top of my head, it does seem like Big Man is playing a lot of different things. A lot of people would view that as a positive, but I guess you're right. You kind of need that balance, right? You can't be picking too few things because then you get banned out.
Yeah.
But you can't be picking too many things because you can't really get in that rhythm.
I think mid position is probably the role that you want the most consistency in. Probably jungle and solo lane is where you can allow yourself for more diverse picks because of how the opening in the early game can change at every single moment. I think late game, you want consistent mage play.
Certainly something that could help out E United. The predictions for this set, wow, 3 people actually thinking Obey Alliance is going to take this one. Hindu, Taco, and Tom. I mean, look, E United has not looked great as of late, but I agree, man. I mean, 3 out of 5? I'm guessing you're going E United.
Of course I'm going E United. Let's put it this way. Obey Alliance, they did beat out Space Station Gaming. But to be fair, Space Station Gaming, they haven't won a set since May 16th. When they beat out Luminosity Gaming. That's almost 4 full calendar months. And they lost 0-3. Obey lost 0-3 to SK in the first week. So not really the best Vegas odds, I would say, going to Obey.
No, I guess the gambler is kind of going with the odds in this one. Man, that actually is very surprising to me. And now I'm even more excited to watch this set and see if they're ended up being right. Totally, thank you very much for joining us and talking about E United. And that leaves Splice coming off a big win over Rival. They've got to prove it yet again up against Dignitas. Stay tuned. We'll find out if they can. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. Splice is looking hot at the beginning here of Phase 2, but got to keep it rolling against a tough opponent in Team Dignitas. We've got Taco, the correspondent for Splice, standing by. Taco, first of all, Splice Jormungandr skin finally revealed. This is going to breathe new life into this team, right? That's how that works?
Without a doubt. I mean, can you imagine how scary that's going to be for Dignitas, knowing that they might have to play against Jormungandr with the Splice skin? That's got to be like a team passive given
Yes.
whenever that skin is in use, right?
It has to be, but luckily for Team Dignitas, it won't be out when their set is happening. But Solo Retrol plays a lot of Yorm, now playing solo lane for Splice. It's good news if you're a Splice fan, I think, right now. But will it be good news when it comes to this match for Team Dignitas? Because I think, everyone from Splice and a lot of the fans kind of got up for that set against Rival, right? We know how tough that one's going to be. And I feel like we're not seeing that same level of hype around this set against Team Dignitas. I'm a little bit worried that there isn't as much energy.
There really should be a lot of hype, though, surrounding these two teams, because, both of these teams in their own respective rights are definitely top of the crop right now in the SPL. But as far as Splice is concerned, when dealing with Dignitas, I think that they can be very problematic for Dig just because of how unconventional we know that Splice can be if necessary. And I think that the uncertainty of what Splice is going to be running, aside from the fact that we know that they like to really prioritize some of those early to mid-game picks that can be really abusive towards junglers specifically, I don't really think that Dig has a whole lot to work with from background information.
Aurora is going to be running you down at some point with something akin to Hercules.
It'll probably be banned.
Yeah, that's the kind of playstyle you're kind of accustomed to when you're going up against Splice. But Splice, I do think, has a lot of availability to kind of throw some wrinkles at you. This meta where these long laners are left alone, Cyclone Spin can play literally anything.
And that's actually what I've been waiting on personally, is to see that adaptation from Cyclone, because it's not like he's foreign to it. Keep in mind, once upon a time ago, when he was in that solo lane role, he loved bringing forth the assassins, and that was kind of unconventional way back in the day also. And now, still, I think that there is a chance that we might begin to see that adaptation of more assassins possibly being brought to the duo lane. It's a heavy risk versus reward case scenario, but if there's a team that I think could pull it off, Splice is certainly one of them.
I think it's a great idea. We've seen these kind of promos we've been doing for some of these players. Cyclone Spin, 2 pentas in SPL play, Kali and Ao Kwang. One of them's magical, but they're both basically assassins. Something to keep an eye out for sure.
And I think it's funny that you mentioned Kali, because keep in mind, over in European SML, we did get to see our very first ADC Kali in a 1v1 Chronos matchup. Chronos having been still one of the more pivotal, I think, ADCs in terms of prioritization as well in competitive play.
Watch out for it. It's coming, potentially, maybe in the hands of Cyclone Spin. But if he's going to be able to make that work, that means that Scream in particular has got to stay strong in the jungle. I think he has looked better and better every week he's been a part of this team.
And I almost feel like he's bringing Venenu with him in every single one of these set performances. But you're right. Scream has just been so consistently strong for Splice to kind of fall back on that. Oftentimes, whenever we do see Splice struggling from solo lane or from the support role, it's almost always Scream who brings everything kind of back to the right order.
Scream has just been a monster so far this phase. This Susano set that he played against Rival, and that's basically what it was a set for him where he just dominated on a pick that we haven't seen a lot of players really pick up as of late. And I think that's where Scream is at his best, where he's playing these gods that you might not be prepared for. He's always got an eclectic god pool.
And it's a very janky one, in all honesty. I still think that there's a couple of pocket picks that we have yet to see from Scream. Maybe when Splice feels as though the time is right for revealing some of those jankier strategies. I know that I'm really looking forward to it, but it is interesting how he is definitely one of the junglers that I'd say is very prone to having at least 4 to 6 gods at just face value that he feels very comfortable picking up and kind of just flexing into whatever seems like it'll be the best control or burst case scenario for that team's draft.
Well, let's take a look at what everyone is feeling in this set, because I think this one might be pretty split. In fact, it's actually a lot in favor of Splice. Anatoly, the only one leaning Dignitas as well.
Whew. I mean, I'm not going to lie. This was probably not an easy decision for any of the casting team to make, but
no.
I can respect Toli for looking towards Dignitas. I mean, as you can probably expect, mine is personally with Splice as well. I think that the fact that Splice just feels a little bit more flexible individually, that might give them the game-winning edge here.
Yeah, certainly something to watch out for as this team continues to get more and more comfortable with each other. Remember, they made roster changes not that long ago. It's a scary time if you're an opponent for Splice. Taco, thank you very much for joining us. Stay tuned here on Esports Weekly. We've got a preview of Roll Queue coming up right after this. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. Roll Queue is a new show that we've been doing here at the Skillshot Studios, where I sit down with a bunch of players from the same role and have them kind of argue it out about whether or not their role is good or bad, and have them talk about each other's play styles. It's been a lot of fun. You can catch it on the SMITEPro YouTube. And the new episode coming out this weekend is all about junglers. It's the talk of the town right now. Take a look.
Something that I hear a lot of when I'm talking to casual players or reading on Reddit and that kind of stuff, there seems to be a bit of a misunderstanding in my mind about what the jungler's job really is on the map. And I'm curious as to what you guys think your job is in any given game. Obviously, if you're playing Athena, it's very different than if you're playing something like Ratatosker. But as a general rule, if you had to kind of sum up what a jungler's job is, what would it be?
Well, a lot of people just think it's to gank lanes and to get their lanes ahead, where competitively, it's like you need to get wards for your team. You need to get proper ward vision. You kind of need to tell your team where to go a lot of the time, so that way you can have easier ganks, or you can control the map better. But yeah, I think that it's kind of just you're working with your team, and you kind of have to be the most important one on your team working with them, because you're the one that's following their jungler, tracking them properly. And I just think that you're probably the most impactful in the game comms wise most of the time. So yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you see the most of the map, right? So that makes sense to me. What do you think the jungler's job is, Twig?
Or at least, I guess, a public misconception, I think, that I see in ranked games and casual games and streams all the time is people kind of expect you to help out your really losing lanes, or lanes that are getting hard out pressured, hard let's say even slightly dove a little bit, or the lanes that are far ahead of your lane. That are let's say a dual lane's playing really far up. The problem is that I feel in general, the higher level you get as a jungler is your job is to play where you're strong, kind of thing. So I think a big misconception is to that your job is to keep your weak lanes try gank and I guess punish aggressive lanes, which sometimes you do, but like in most cases, I think you play off where you have pressure and where you can win fights and where you're ahead as a jungler. And I think that's like the biggest misconception between what you do at like the pro level, which is like you just want to fight where you're going to win fights.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially like if the lane is super fed, like a duo lane is 0-4, and they're both, support and ADC are both 2 levels up on you. You're just going to show up and die.
Right. Well, yeah, the best thing is that if you're against a jungler that you like respect or is like knows what they're doing, they're going to mirror where you go. Mm-hmm. So if you go gank a duo lane that's like 2 levels ahead of your duo lane and their jungle mirrors you like they kind of should, and let's say they see you on a ward running there, you're going to like get 3-man wiped and you're going to lose gold. Like it's often like you have to kind of respect the other jungler like when you like I think the higher level you get, that's kind of the games that you play.
Yeah, absolutely. What about for you guys?
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think it's mostly farming. Like junglers, you don't really like. How many times have you seen an actual good gank? Like maybe 15 minutes. I think it's kind of hard, especially early game. You don't have enough damage to actually kill someone unless you're playing like very specific gods. Kind of just need to make sure you're out-farming the enemy jungler and making sure you're ready for like the 3v3 fights if your team is winning them. Mm-hmm. Or if you're losing them, you need to at least be making sure you're getting your camps. But I think it's very team dependent. Now our team is mostly just be ready for the camps that might get invaded and be ready to invade the camps that we can invade. That's kind of my job, just to be ready for camps that we're going to contest for.
Sure. Clear all the farm as soon as it comes up. Makes sense to me.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with what they're both saying. I think it's a kind of like a bit supportive early game in a way that you're kind of on farm control. You're trying to control farm. You're trying to like, obviously, if you can find invades or whatever, you go for them. But you're mainly trying to control the farm around the map, like be around for like mid RPs, and then you have to play to your strengths. So say you have like a good solo lane matchup, you try and beat up for blue buff invades. You try and help your lanes win that are winning, and that's kind of what you get to do early game.
Sure.
You don't really look that much for plays. Obviously, there's some matchups where you can look for ganks on some characters, but a lot of the time, like you can't even gank because you don't have that much damage.
Right.
And if you gank, you have to do it whilst your jungle is all cleared, because otherwise you probably even like not even get anything out of it.
Right, it's less efficient.
Yeah.
To get the kill even. Makes sense to me.
If you want to see the entirety of that Roll Queue episode, it is premiering on the SMITEPro YouTube on Saturday. A little bit of a hint for you guys who watch Esports Weekly, though. Search Inside the SPL on Spotify. Who knows what will happen? Stay tuned. We're going over to the minor league when we get back. Welcome back to Esports Weekly, everybody. The Smite Minor League has been a real treat. If you're not tuning in every Tuesday, you're missing out because there is a ton of action right now. Going into Phase 2, we added 2 more teams into the Smite Minor League, and it has caused quite a shakeup, at least in North America, maybe not so much in Europe. But we're going to start in Europe and take a look at what we've seen so far there. Flashpoint and Simplicity continue to battle it out for the top end of the European standings. Flashpoint right now have the slightest of edges because of their game plus minus. The 2 teams that were added at the beginning of Phase 2, both Horizon Union and Exordium, have not made a lot of noise, though. Horizon Union did take a game off Simplicity and really maybe should have won the set on Tuesday. That tells you all you need to know about how competitive this league is right now. 2 versus 5, and it was still very close. That top end are going to be a total battle till the end. At this rate, though, between Flashpoint and Simplicity. But don't count out Queso or Out Cold. Both those teams continuing to improve as well. As for the North American side of things, this is where I get excited. Because, look, Phase 1, let's be real. We all said, oh, it's Baskin and Snoopy and Scream on Armada, and they're just going to win it all. And they did in the Phase 1. But now, Baskin's still there, but Scream, Snoopy, they're both gone. Oh, they picked up these 2 chumps by the name of Mask and Vedium. Yeah, great SPL talents. They're still going to dominate, right? Wrong. It's a former SPL player, but not the ones on Armada that's dominating. It's Mollusk and Hype Unit up on top right now, 5-0 after a convincing 2-0 victory over Armada on Tuesday. Sanguine's looking great so far, but at this point, it is Hype Unit's region to lose. And I don't know if they're losing it anytime soon. I mean, look, this squad is solid. And by the way, BennyQ's best god, Olorun, is getting buffed. So that's looking scary, if you ask me. Let's take a look at the schedule for next week in the Smite Minor League. We're going to kick it off at Europe, as we always do, and look at Cryptic and Hype Unit. Oh, excuse me, that's a swap there. So we're going to kick it off with Europe, but it's going to be Flashpoint out cold. Just look at the other way around. And then we're going to have some very good games between Sanguine and Exilium. Exilium making some roster changes, so that's one that you should keep your eye on. Flashpoint out cold, I believe, will kick us off on Tuesday, and that one should be a lot of fun as out cold continues to look better and better. Eventually a team with Pretty Prime and Dimmy and Frostyak and all these guys is going to be really good, right? Right? Any day now. Out cold. Maybe this is the week. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. If you missed it, we've got a lot of SPL talk as well. This week is going to be critical for Team Dignitas and how well they can compete with some of the best teams in the SPL. As of right now, they're in the second place. Will they be after this week? Depends on if they beat Pittsburgh Knights and if they beat Splice. Splice is in danger of being on the precipice of 7th seed, which is just nuts to me. But with a win, they could jump up pretty far, all the way up to 4. SPL, real competitive. Have you heard that one before? Dignitas Pittsburgh Knights are going to kick us off on Thursday, followed by Obey versus E United. Splice Dignitas on Friday, and then PK finds the second end of their doubleheader up against Obey Alliance. It's going to be a big week of the SPL, so make sure you tune in. First things first on Thursday, you are not going to want to miss Dignitas versus the Pittsburgh Knights. I talked about it being a big test week for Dignitas. Didn't even realize that maybe Pittsburgh Knights should be a little bit concerned. Graham talked about it on his correspondence segment a little bit with Obey Alliance. Maybe we see an angry PK team after a potential loss to Dignitas on Thursday, going up against Obey on Friday. What happens if PK does lose a close one on Thursday, gets a little bit upset, doesn't play their best on Friday? Maybe Obey Alliance can steal a win. This is a big week for the 9th seed right now in Obey Alliance, and maybe they can make it happen. Thanks so much for tuning into Esports Weekly. As always, you can always find the VODs of previous Esports Weeklies on YouTube and all that kind of good stuff. If you want to stay up to date on everything SMITEPro, at SMITEPro on Twitter. That's the best place to find all that. As I mentioned, Roll Q coming out this weekend, so make sure you go to the SMITEPro YouTube for that. And if you want to get in touch with me, maybe send me a nice message, I don't know, an emoji or two, that is at Aggro on Twitter. So make sure you stay tuned. Esports Weekly coming at you next week as well, every single Wednesday here right around 4 p.m. on Mixer.com/SmiteGame. Close enough. We got there. We're the Skillshot Studios. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll see you next week here on Esports Weekly. Peach it.